night my brother got promoted to partner at my father's firm, my dad ordered a $400 bottle of Camus and poured glasses for everyone at the table, except me. Not because he forgot, he looked right at me when he reached past my empty glass to hand one to my mother. Then he raised his and said, "To my son, the future of this family." I was sitting there with a signed offer letter in my purse from Hartwell and Associates, the third largest architecture firm in the Southeast, making me, at 31, the youngest senior project lead they'd ever hired. I hadn't told anyone yet. I was going to announce it that night at dinner because I thought I genuinely believed that it might finally matter. I put the letter back in my purse and drank my water. My name is Sera, and for most of my life, I thought if I just worked hard enough, my family would eventually see me. I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, in a house that smelled like my father's pipe tobacco and my mother's white linen perfume. My father built a small but respected commercial real estate firm from nothing. Alderman and Sons, the sign said, even though there was only ever one son who counted. My brother, 2 years older than me, was groomed for it from the time he could tie his shoes. I was groomed to smile at client dinners and not talk too much about myself. I loved architecture before I knew what to call it. I used to draw floor plans in my notebooks during church, tiny squares for rooms, dotted lines for load-bearing walls. My father said it was a nice hobby. When I told him I wanted to study at Clemson's architecture program, he said, "Women do interior design, that's the practical side of it." He wasn't cruel about it. That was almost worse. He said it the way you tell someone the weather. I went to Clemson anyway. Paid for it myself through a combination of merit scholarships and waitressing double shifts on weekends. My brother got his MBA funded entirely by our parents, plus a new Audi when he graduated. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself a lot of things. For 3 years after college, I worked at a small residential firm in Charleston, doing good work, careful work, the kind that gets noticed if anyone's paying attention. My supervisor, a woman named Dr. Masler, a Mecca Walsh who had more patience for talent than anyone I've ever met, kept pushing my projects into regional competitions. We won too. She's the reason I applied to Hartwell. My father's response when I told him I'd gotten the interview was, "They do mostly commercial, don't they?" That's a tough world for someone just starting out. I was 29. The year I got the Hartwell offer was also the year my brother made partner. Those two things happened within the same month, and in my family, only one of them was worth a Camus Cabernet and a toast at the dinner table. I drove home that night, thinking about the offer letter sitting in my purse. I thought about Dr. Emika Walsh telling me, "You earned this, Sera, not because you're good for your age, because you're good, period." I thought about the 12-hour days and the AutoCAD models I'd rebuilt 3 times because they weren't right yet and I couldn't live with wrong. And I thought, they will never see it. Not because they're bad people. That's what took me the longest to understand. My father isn't a villain. He's a man with a picture in his head of how a family works and who plays which part, and no amount of reality has ever been able to update that picture. My brother, for his part, had learned to work within that picture perfectly. He was charming in the way of people who've never had to fight for anything. Easy confidence, easy laugh. He wasn't malicious toward me. He just never questioned why I wasn't in the photo. The months after that dinner, I threw myself into Hartwell. My first major project was a mixed-use development in Charlotte, retail on the ground floor, 8 stories of residential above, a rooftop terrace that I designed to face west specifically for the Sunset Line. The clients were difficult. The budget was revised 4 times. I slept maybe 5 hours a night for 3 months, and I loved every minute of it. The building won a Regional Design Award from the AIA Carolinas chapter. My photo was in the Charlotte Observer. My mother called to say she'd seen it and that I looked thin. My father didn't call. What he did do, and I didn't find out until much later, was tell his golfing friends that I worked for a design company in Charlotte. Not an architecture firm, not a senior project lead, a design company. like I arranged throw pillows for a living. I found out because one of those golfing friends had a daughter who looked me up after hearing my name, found my LinkedIn and texted her father a screenshot. He mentioned it to my dad. My dad apparently said, "She does well for herself." Her brother's the one building the real legacy, though. The real legacy. I sat with that for a while. The breaking point didn't come from my father, though. It came from my brother. Hartwell had started doing some preliminary consulting for a mixed-use project in the Greenville metro area, a large-scale commercial development that overlapped with the exact kind of properties my father's firm handled. I mentioned it to my family at Thanksgiving carefully, professionally. I said there might be an opportunity to connect the teams. My brother asked me approximately 4 questions about it: the developer's name, the projected timeline, the anchor tenant situation, the square footage, and I answered all of them because he's my brother and I thought he was interested. 6 weeks later, my father's firm announced they'd been brought on as the leasing consultants for a major Greenville development project. The press release named my brother as the lead point of contact. When I called my brother, he said, "It was a business opportunity, Sera. I heard the same information you did. I just moved faster. I told you that in confidence. You told me at Thanksgiving dinner. There were 7 people at the table. I didn't have an answer for that, not because he was right, but because I was so tired of finding the exact moment where something that should have been family became ammunition." I told my supervisor at Hartwell what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to protect the project, or do you want to protect the relationship?" "Both," I said. "Then you need to decide which one matters more right now." I protected the project. I documented everything, every email, every preliminary design file, every consultant contract, and made sure Hartwell's involvement was ironclad in a way that left no room for my brother's firm to claim overlap. The developer ultimately kept both teams compartmentalized, which meant we worked in parallel without ever being in the same room. My brother called it a great outcome. I called it the end of something I hadn't admitted was already over. Here's the thing about being the overlooked child in a high-achieving family: you spend years developing a skill set that the favored child never has to build. You learn to document. You learn to work without credit. You learn to be so precise that there's no gap between what you promised and what you delivered. Those aren't just survival skills, they're professional ones. And eventually they compound. The Charlotte project led to 2 more. Those led to a referral from the AIA Awards Committee to a civic development team in Raleigh that was building a new public library branch. My first public project, the kind that makes it onto city websites and gets dedicated with a ribbon cutting and a photo in the mayor's newsletter. Dr. Saxer, Emeka Walsh, drove up from Charleston for the ribbon cutting. She stood next to me in the cold February drizzle and watched the mayor shake my hand. And she didn't say anything for a second, just squeezed my arm. "You know what the best part is," she said. "What?" "You didn't need anyone's permission." My father came to the ribbon cutting. My mother called and told me he was planning to come, and I was surprised enough that I didn't say much in response. He drove 3 hours from Greenville. He stood at the back of the small crowd in his good wool coat, the gray one he wears to church. He didn't introduce himself to anyone. After the ceremony, he walked over to me and stood there for a moment looking at the building. "It's a good design," he said finally. Those 4 words hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not because they were enough, they weren't, but because I could hear in them exactly how much it cost him to say them. My father is not a man who admits error. He's also not a man who admits error. He's also not a man who drives 3 hours in February for nothing. I said, "Thank you for coming." We stood there in the drizzle for another minute, then he left. My brother did not come. He was in Charlotte that weekend, or so he said. I found out through my mother, who finds out everything, that he'd been in Greenville all along. He just hadn't wanted to stand in a crowd and watch me get a handshake from the mayor. I understood. His whole identity is built on being the one who's going somewhere. Watching me arrive somewhere was more than he could manage. The project that changed everything, the one that I think of as the line between before and after, was the Meridian Center. It was a community health and services hub proposed for a historically underserved neighborhood in West Raleigh. Public funding, non-profit anchors, a free clinic, a GED program, a food co-op on the ground floor. The kind of project that doesn't have a glamorous client. It has a coalition of community organizations and a city planning grant and very specific constraints on budget and timeline. Hartwell assigned it to me because I'd done well on the library. I also think they assigned it to me because it was genuinely difficult and they knew I wouldn't drop the ball. I spent 8 months on it. I lived inside that project, neighborhood meetings at 6 in the evening, site visits in the rain, redesigning the entry sequence 3 times because the first 2 versions didn't feel right for the people who were actually going to use the building. I talked to the clinic staff. I talked to the GED coordinator. I talked to an 83-year-old woman named Ms. Hollingsworth who'd lived 2 blocks from the site for 50 years and told me, very plainly, don't make it look like it doesn't belong here. I didn't. The Meridian Center was completed 13 months after groundbreaking. It came in on budget. The free clinic opened with a wait list of 400 people on the first day. The AIA gave it a National Honor Award, not regional, national, which is the kind of thing that gets architecture journalists interested. One of them called my office on a Thursday afternoon. She was writing a piece for Architect magazine on emerging civic designers under 40 and wanted to interview me. We talked for an hour and a half. She asked me about my process, about the neighborhood engagement approach, about the tension between budget constraints and design integrity, and I answered all of it as honestly as I could. The piece ran on a Tuesday. By Friday, my inbox had 200 unread messages. My father's call came on Saturday morning. He didn't congratulate me. He said, I saw the article. Then a pause. Why didn't you tell us this was happening? I thought about that for a moment. Why didn't I tell them? Because I'd told them things before and watched those things get redirected, minimized, compared. Because the last time I shared something I was proud of at a family dinner, my father refilled his wine and asked my brother about his quarter. I don't know, Dad, I said. I didn't think it would matter to you. The silence on the line was the kind that has weight. That's not fair, he said. No, I said. It isn't. He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't help him find one. My brother's response was more predictable. He texted me a link to the article with the message, big deal, proud of you. 11 words after 31 years of being made invisible in our own family. I looked at the text for a long time. Then I put my phone down and made coffee and stood at my kitchen window watching the neighborhood wake up, and I let myself feel exactly how insufficient 11 words were. And then I let it go. Not for him. For me. Here's what I've learned, and actually learned, not the version you say at dinner parties. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I can forgive my father for having a limited picture of the world without inviting him back into the frame of my life as if nothing happened. I can love my mother, who did love me in the way she knew how, without pretending she ever advocated for me the way I needed. I can wish my brother well without trusting him with anything that matters. The relationships I have now, the ones that actually sustain me, are with people who saw me before I had a National Honor Award. Dr. Emeka Walsh, who has texted me, told you so approximately 40 times since the article ran. A handful of colleagues at Hartwell who stayed late with me on the hard nights. The GED coordinator from the Meridian Center who sends me a photo every graduation day of her students in their caps and gowns in front of my building. Those are the people who built the real legacy. I got a call 8 months after the Architect magazine piece from a non-profit coalition in Atlanta that's planning the largest community development project in the city's south side in 20 years. They want me to lead the design team. It would mean relocating, building a new team, starting something from the ground up in a city that isn't mine yet. I said yes before they finished describing it. my father asked at the next family gathering. A lukewarm, uneasy affair that we all showed up to because my mother asked if I was nervous about such a big move. I looked at him across the table. The same table where he'd poured wine past my glass without blinking. The same man who told his friends I worked for a design company. No, I said, I've been building toward this my whole career. He nodded, slowly, like something was recalibrating. I know, he said. It wasn't an apology. I don't think he's capable of one, not a real one. But it was the closest thing to being seen that I have ever received from him, and I took it for what it was. Not enough, and also not nothing. I drove to Atlanta the following April, my car packed with drafting tools and a framed print of the Meridian Center that Ms. Granta Hollingsworth signed for me the day the clinic opened. I didn't need anyone's blessing. I didn't need a toast. I just needed the road and enough coffee and the kind of certainty that you can only build by surviving the years when no one believed you were building anything at all. The first morning in my new apartment, before the movers had finished, I stood at the window and looked out at a city that didn't know my name yet. That's the best feeling I know. The before they know yet. The quiet before you show them what you've been doing all along. I started work on Monday. There's a moment I keep coming back to, standing in February drizzle outside a building I spent 8 months of my life designing, watching my father drive away in his grey wool coat. He said 4 words, "It's a good design," and then he left. That was it. 3 hours each way, and 4 words. I used to think the story I was living was about being unseen, about a father who poured wine past my glass like I wasn't there, a brother who took the information I shared in good faith and turned it into a business deal, a family that had decided years before I'd proven anything what role I was going to play. For a long time I believed that if I just built enough, won enough, published enough, showed up enough, the picture would change. What I understand now is that the building was never really about them. Every late night I spent rebuilding a model because it wasn't right yet. Every neighborhood meeting I sat through at 6 in the evening, every time I asked Miss Hollingsworth what she actually needed instead of assuming I already knew, none of that was for my father's approval. I was doing it because it was the right way to work. Because integrity isn't something you perform for an audience, it's what you do when no one's watching and no one's going to toast you for it. That's the part that took me the longest to learn. Not how to be skilled. Skill is teachable, improvable, something you can track. What took longer was learning to be honest, honest about what I was building and why. Honest about the moment my brother took what I shared in trust and used it, and honest enough to protect my work without pretending the betrayal didn't hurt. I didn't retaliate. I documented. I drew a clear line. That's not weakness. That's the kind of clear-eyed thinking that actually protects the people who depend on you, the clinic staff, the GED students, Miss Hollingsworth, who asked me not to build something that didn't belong. And then there's the part that nobody talks about, the endurance. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, the unglamorous kind. The kind that looks like redesigning an entry sequence for the 3rd time because the first 2 versions weren't good enough for the people who were actually going to walk through that door every day. The kind that looks like sitting with 4 words, "It's a good design," and deciding that's not enough to build a life around, and driving to Atlanta anyway. Dr. Emeka Walsh texted me, "Told you so," the morning the Architect magazine piece ran. 40 times since, she said. I laughed the first time. By the 40th, I understood what she was really saying. She saw it before I fully believed it myself. That's what the right people do. They hold the belief steady until you're ready to carry it yourself. My father is not a villain. My brother is not either. They're people who had a picture of how things were supposed to work, and I didn't fit it. That's a painful thing to accept, that someone can love you in whatever limited way they're capable of, and still not be able to see you. I stopped waiting for the picture to update. I started building something they didn't have a frame for. The Meridian Center is still there. The clinic opens every morning. And somewhere in Atlanta, there's a city that doesn't know my name yet. I like it that way, for now.